Minister, this week's Auditor General reveals how much Liberals love McKinsey, but especially those at National Defence. National Defence gave 15 contracts to McKinsey, 13 of which were non-competitive. In addition to breaking all kinds of rules, these contracts have gone to a company that is simultaneously working with the militaries of our strategic adversaries. Did you ever inquire about which other militaries McKinsey is working for around the world?
Indicated, officials perhaps could give you that information. I am not involved in the contracting process, but I would like to share with you.
Sir, if I can just clarify, it was a very specific question about actions you've taken as minister. Have you ever inquired? The McKinsey story has been in the news, right? You will have seen it. Did you ever inquire about which other militaries McKinsey is working for at the same time as working for the Canadian Department of National Defence?
Thank you. And with respect to the steps that I've taken, I'm happy to share with you. We've reduced the government use of professional services by 15% since I've taken over. We've ended the standing offers with McKinsey and all similar companies, and we've introduced stricter requirements for departments to make suppliers more transparent and accountable.
Okay, Minister, that wasn't the question.
I've never engaged with anyone from McKinsey. I've never talked to anyone there.
Okay.
And so I haven't got the information you seek, but one of my colleagues, perhaps Mr. Crosby, might have that information.
Have you ever asked your officials or sought information about which other militaries around the world McKinsey works for?
No.
Okay. Do you think you should have? Do you think that's important information? Do you think that's germane to the fact that they're also working for the Canadian Armed Forces?
My expectation is that our very professional and capable public service and people responsible for the procurement of these contracts would exercise due diligence in ensuring that with whomever we contract with meet our ethical and security requirements.
Well, can either of the public officials answer here? Very briefly, has the Department of Defense ever gotten information from McKinsey regarding which other militaries they're working with around the world? It's just a yes or a no.
Mr. Chair, the way we approach this is not to inquire what other work they have necessarily, but to ensure that the companies meet the security requirements checklist.
Okay, so the answer is no.
We don't go and pursue what other business they have. It's a large multinational. We ensure that they have the right.
Okay, yeah. So I guess this is a policy question, and it comes back to you, Minister, who's responsible for the direction here. When McKinsey has done particularly well from this government, but overwhelmingly from National Defence, 13 non-competitive contracts, we've seen the Auditor General's report that McKinsey has been favoured by this government significantly. At the same time, we know, in a limited way, not fully, but we know that McKinsey is engaged actively with our strategic adversaries around the world. That doesn't mean that they're sharing specific privileged information, but they're learning things from us that those same associates are applying in their interactions with foreign militaries. At a policy level, do you think this is good policy to not make these inquiries?
I think it's very good policy that anyone contracting with the Canadian government and the Department of National Defence either in competitive process or through standing offers, that they be subject to and meet the rigorous security standards that we put in place.
But should those include inquiries into who else they're working for at the same time?
Well, frankly, if there was any indication in that security review and screen that is put in place that indicated that that was a concern, my expectation that would be brought to light.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a fundamental concern, but I'll move.
Okay.
I think we've heard your position. You've heard mine. It's
Yep.
it's a policy disagreement, and Canadians can make their judgment about whether that's a problem. This committee's heard from Mr. Yao, employee at National Defence, at the same time as his company was getting contracts from the government. Our view is that, aside from the particular problems of his case, we don't think that it makes sense to have someone who is an employee of the government who is also being contracted out to for certain work. If they're an employee, the purpose of contracting out is that the skills to do that activity don't exist within government. So why would you contract out to someone who's also a government employee? Which is why we put forward a motion to this committee that was passed, though opposed by the Liberal members, that was passed, calling on the government to end any of these double-dipping arrangements where a government employee is also a recipient of government contracts. Do you believe that the Department of National Defence should end all instances of double dipping?
Perhaps you're not aware that a significant number of the members of the Canadian Armed Forces are reservists. By the very definition of their work, they are also employed in other occupations. Some of them are police officers or firemen. Some of them are electricians.
Let's set aside the reservist question, because I think that there's a particular situation.
That's a situation where they are both.
Yeah. So I have limited time. Let's set that aside. I understand that there's a particular case there of reservists, people that are full-time employees of your department, and also benefits of contract. Do we think we should end all double dipping in those cases?
Well, I think what we should do is ensure that all of the rules with respect to the declaration of conflict of interest are clearly articulated, and that appropriate measures are put in place to eliminate those
but if you have a
conflicts.
declaration and the conflict of interest persists, declaring something doesn't change that there's a conflict of interest. If the conflict of interest persists, why don't we just end the conflict of interest by ending double dipping?
And respectfully, there's a spectrum of potential conflicts of interest. Some of those risks can be mitigated. Some of them require a full screen. Some of them would be an absolute prohibition from engaging in any contracts with the department. So it's a range. It really depends on the position the person holds and the services that they may be providing. There is an appropriate response. I am absolutely concerned that in this case, this individual did not meet those screening requirements. We've put some very rigorous steps in place in direct response to the recommendations of the Auditor General to make sure that that does not happen again. And when it
Thank
came
you,
to light,
Minister. I'm afraid that is the time. I allowed
Thank you, Mr.
extra
Chair.
time for you to answer it.